Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into the streets of medieval Cairo. Just as the sun sinks behind the minarets and the heat finally loosens its grip, you're standing on worn stone that still remembers sandals and hooves, and the air smells like dust cooling after a long day, bread ovens sighing their last warmth, and the Nile somewhere nearby, pretending not to watch. Lamps flicker to life one by one, like shy stars deciding whether the night is safe enough to begin. Somewhere a voice clears its throat, preparing to announce the hour, and you realize gently, sleepily, that this is the moment the night watch takes over. You probably won't survive this, by the way. At least not if you expect modern lighting, caffeine, or the radical concept of locking your door and ignoring everyone until morning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking as dusk deepens, and Cairo Fatimid Cairo, to be precise, changes its posture. During the day, this city is all elbows and noise, merchants arguing, donkeys refusing to negotiate, scholars gesturing too enthusiastically with inky fingers. At night, though, the city inhales and becomes careful. Streets narrow, not just physically but socially. Shadows claim corners, and that's when the night watchmen step forward, lighting their lanterns with practiced motions that say, yes, they've done this thousands of times, and yes, their wrists know the weight of oil and flame better than their own names. A mainstream historical fact settles in here. Medieval Cairo, especially from the Fatimid period onward, maintained organized night patrols known as haras or similar local watch systems, tasked with keeping order after dark. These weren't just random guys with lamps hoping for the best. They were part of the urban machinery, as essential as water carriers or bakers, ensuring fires were spotted early, disputes didn't grow teeth, and thieves thought twice before testing a locked door. You can almost feel the administrative logic behind it, humming softly beneath the call to prayer still echoing in your ears. You pass one of these watchmen now. He nods not warmly, not coldly, just enough to register your existence. His lantern swings in a slow arc, casting amber light onto walls plastered with old notices and newer graffiti. The flame inside is fed by oil, often sesame or olive, and trimmed carefully so it doesn't sputter. A quirky tidbit floats in with the smoke. Some watchmen were known to scent their lantern oil with herbs, partly to mask the smell of burning fat, and partly, perhaps, because everyone deserves a small luxury. Even a man paid to stare at alleys all night. Imagine choosing your signature lantern scent. Lavender says approachable. Garlic says don't ask. The street itself feels alive but subdued. Cats weave between your feet like liquid confidence, completely unbothered by centuries of human nonsense. Doors close with final thuds. Wooden shutters slide into place. Above you, mashrabia screens. Those intricate wooden lattices hide upper rooms where families settle onto cushions, whispering, laughing softly, or already drifting towards sleep. The watchman's light glances upward, briefly illuminating carved patterns, then moves on. He is not here to pry, just to remind the night that someone is paying attention. Historians still argue whether these patrols were primarily about crime prevention, or more about projecting state authority into the dark hours. As you walk, it's easy to see both sides. On one hand, crime at night was a genuine concern. On the other, a lantern-bearing figure moving predictably through neighborhoods sends a clear message. The city doesn't fully sleep, and neither does power. It's a comforting thought if you're trying to rest. Slightly less comforting if you were hoping to sneak out for a midnight snack without witnesses. You hear the first-time call of the night, shouted or sung, depending on the watchman's mood and vocal confidence. Timekeeping here isn't about minutes. It's about stretches of darkness divided by prayer times and practical necessity. The voice carries, bouncing off walls, announcing not just the hour but the continued existence of order. There's something oddly soothing about it, like an ancient version of a phone notification that actually improves your life. Joke number 1 slips in gently. At least this notification can't be set to vibrate loudly on a wooden table. The lantern roots themselves are beginning to form around you, though you won't fully trace them until later. For now you just sense the rhythm. Turn here, pause there, linger at that intersection where trouble once brewed. The watchman adjusts his grip on a short wooden club. Not a dramatic weapon, more like a firm suggestion in stick form. Its presence is symbolic as much as practical. Most nights, persuasion and reputation do the work. Everyone knows who walks these streets, and everyone knows he'll be back in about an hour. A breeze carries the smell of the Nile again. cooler now, mixed with something sweet. Maybe dates, maybe someone still baking despite the hour. Your sandals scuff lightly, and you realize how aware you are of sound. Every step matters. Even breathing feels louder. The watchman's lantern sways, and for a moment the flame gutters, then steadies. There's your second light joke of the night. Ancient Cairo, where even the fire needs reassurance. You pause near a small mosque, its courtyard empty, its lamps glowing faintly. The watchman stops too, just long enough to check that all is well. This is the beginning of a long night, one that will unfold slowly, methodically, with patience as its main ingredient. No rushing, no dramatic confrontations mostly. Just the steady promise that someone is walking while others sleep. And as you continue alongside that gentle pool of light, you feel the city settling around you, brick by brick, breath by breath, ready to let the night watch take it from here. You keep walking without ceremony, because the night doesn't reset itself, just because you've crossed an invisible boundary between ideas. The lantern glow carries you forward, and now your attention drifts from the streets themselves to the people who patrol them. You start to notice the watchmen as individuals rather than silhouettes. Their footsteps differ slightly, one drags a heel, another walks with careful symmetry, as if counting tiles. These men, and sometimes older boys apprenticed into the role, didn't emerge from nowhere. They came from the same city they now guard, which means they carry its habits, grudges and gossip with them like invisible baggage. A mainstream historical fact saw riddles in quietly. Night watchmen in medieval Cairo were often recruited locally, sometimes through neighborhood recommendation or appointment by city officials tied to the police or market inspectorates. This wasn't a glamorous career path. It didn't attract the elite or the scholarly. Instead, it drew artisans past their prime, former soldiers whose bodies protested daytime labor, and men with just enough reputation for reliability, but not enough wealth to avoid night work. You get the sense that everyone knows who they are and that they know everyone right back, which is sort of the point. You pass a watchman who looks older than the stone wall beside him. His beard is streaked with grey, his shoulders rounded not by fear but by years of repetition. He adjusts his lantern and glances at you with mild curiosity, the way someone looks at a cat that might belong to a neighbor. There's quiet pride here. Being trusted with the night means something, even if the pay is modest and the hours are inconvenient in the extreme. Joke number 1 floats in. Medieval Cairo, where graveyard shift is not metaphorical and naps are a competitive sport. Some watchmen inherited the role in a loose, unofficial way. A father grows too stiff to walk the routes, and a son begins accompanying him, first carrying oil, then learning corners, then slowly becoming the familiar face everyone expects to see after sunset. Others arrive through stranger paths. A quirky tidbit drifts in. There are hints in chronicles that a few watchmen were once reformed troublemakers themselves, hired precisely because they knew how mischief worked and where it liked to hide. If you've ever been told to keep an eye on that one, this is the medieval urban planning version. Reputation matters enormously here. A watchman who drinks too much, sleeps on duty, or accepts the wrong favors doesn't last long, or at least doesn't keep good roots. The city has ways of noticing neglect. Fires start, thefts increase, complaints ripple through mosques and markets. Conversely, a watchman known for fairness and calm earns quiet respect. Doors open for him. He's offered leftover bread, a cup of watered wine or sweet tea, maybe a place to sit for a moment if his knees demand negotiation. These small exchanges grease the wheels of nighttime order far more effectively than shouting ever could. Historians still argue whether night watchmen were primarily state agents or community representatives with a badge-shaped suggestion of authority. Walking beside them, you can see how blurry that line is. They answer to officials, yes, but they also answer to neighbors who will remember every decision made under lantern light. It's a balancing act performed nightly, without applause, often without thanks. You notice differences between watchmen as you move deeper into the city. One hums softly, almost unconsciously, repeating the same phrase like a charm against sleep. Another mutters complaints about his sandals, which are apparently the wrong thickness for tonight's stones. A third walks in near silence, conserving energy, eyes flicking to doorways and rooftops with trained boredom. That boredom is important. It means nothing is wrong. Excitement, in this job, is a failure state. Their clothing is practical and unremarkable. Simple robes, sturdy belts, sometimes a wrapped turban or cap depending on season and status. Nothing flashy. Authority here isn't about looking impressive, it's about being recognizable. You want a thief to spot that lantern from a distance and decide, gently, to go home instead. Joke number 2 slides in. Deterrence by mild disappointment rather than fear. There's also the question of trust. Being a night watchman means being awake while others are vulnerable. You pass shuttered homes full of sleeping families, and it's clear that these men occupy a strange moral space. They could exploit the darkness, they could look the other way. That they mostly don't is part of the social miracle of cities. Some sources suggest watchmen swore informal oaths or were vouched for by respected locals. Others imply the system relied less on ideals and more on the simple fact that everyone's watching the watcher, eventually. You overhear a brief exchange, two watchmen crossing paths at a corner, trading updates in low voices. All quiet, cat knocked over a pot. Same as always. This is intelligence sharing at its most soothing. No secret codes, no dramatic hand signals, just continuity. The night is unfolding as expected, and that's the best possible outcome. A small scholarly debate hums along as you walk. Historians still argue whether night watchmen enjoyed higher social standing than other labourers, or occupied a liminal, slightly suspicious role. Were they respected guardians or tolerated necessities? The answer seems to depend on neighbourhood, period, and personality. Like modern security guards, their authority is both obvious and fragile, rooted in routine rather than force. As the hour deepens, you sense fatigue settling into their movements, but also a practiced resilience. They know when to pause, when to lean briefly against a wall, when to sip from a flask without losing awareness. Sleepiness is an old enemy here, one met with pacing, quiet songs, and occasionally a very cold splash of water to the face. Joke number 3 arrives softly. The original energy drink is existential responsibility. You continue onward, now seeing the lantern not just as light, but as biography. Every swing carries a life story shaped by necessity, habit, and the quiet agreement that someone should be awake so others don't have to be. And as the watchman ahead of you turns another corner, you follow, already understanding him a little better than before. You don't stop walking when your focus shifts again. You simply let your hands imagine what the watchman's hands already know. Tools define the night as much as people do, and here authority fits neatly into a few modest objects. The lantern comes first, always. It's not decorative, it's a working thing, smudged with soot, its metal frame warm to the touch, glass panes slightly clouded from years of smoke. You picture yourself lifting it, feeling the gentle resistance of oil sloshing inside. The way the flame responds to movement like a sleepy creature adjusting in its nest. A mainstream historical fact settles in with the weight of routine. Lanterns used by Cairo's night watchmen were typically oil-fed and designed to burn steadily for hours, often shielded to prevent gusts from snuffing them out. Keeping that flame alive was part of the job. If a lantern went dark, it wasn't just inconvenient. It was a small crisis. Darkness invites misunderstanding. Darkness invites confidence in the wrong people. So you see watchmen pausing at known spots, trimming wicks, topping off oil from small flasks, performing maintenance with the calm focus of someone who's done this every night for years. You glance at the oil itself. Sesame oil is common, sometimes olive depending on cost and availability. It smells faintly nutty as it burns, mixing with the night air in a way that becomes inseparable from memory. Later, long after this world is gone, people will describe Cairo nights as scented with smoke and river dampness, and this is what they mean. A quirky tidbit slips in. Some watchmen believed certain oils burned quieter than others, less prone to popping or flickering, which they felt made the night calmer. Whether that's chemistry or superstition is still up for debate, but you can't blame them for wanting the flame on their side. Hanging from the watchman's belt or resting easily in his grip is the wooden club. It's short, unadorned, and very honest about what it's for. Not combat, not conquest, discouragement. A visible reminder that arguments should end quickly and politely. These clubs are often made locally, shaped by the same craftsmen who carve furniture or tool handles. You imagine the wood smooth from years of handling, darkened by sweat and oil. Joke number 1 drifts in. The medieval equivalent of "please don't make me use this," delivered entirely through posture. The club's role is more symbolic than violent. Most disputes don't need it. A raised voice, a stern look, the presence of light where light shouldn't be, that's usually enough. Historians still argue whether watchmen were expected to physically intervene often, or mainly observe and report. Walking here, it feels like the latter. This is a city that prefers problems to dissolve quietly rather than explode theatrically. Then there's the clothing. Simple robes, yes, but chosen with intention. Dark enough not to show soot, light enough to move easily. Belts are important, not just to hold tools, but to signal readiness. You notice pouches hanging from them. Oil flasks, maybe a bit of bread wrapped in cloth, Sometimes a small charm or verse tucked away for luck. A fringe belief whispers through the night. Some watchmen carried talismans against jinn or bad fortune, especially on routes near cemeteries or abandoned buildings. Rational or not, it's easier to walk into darkness when you feel accompanied by more than just a flame. Footwear matters too. Sandals thick enough to protect against uneven stones, flexible enough to feel changes underfoot. You become aware of how much information travels up through the soles. Temperature shifts, loose gravel, damp patches hinting at leaks or spills. This sensory awareness is part of the toolkit, even if it's never listed on any official inventory. The lantern casts moving patterns on walls as you go, briefly illuminating textures, cracked plaster, carved inscriptions, layers of repair upon repair. You realize the lantern is also a kind of mobile inspection device. Watchmen spot structural issues, leaning walls, suspicious piles of debris that might hide embers. Fire is the great fear here. More than thieves, more than violence. Densely packed neighborhoods and wooden beams make vigilance essential. Joke number 2 floats gently by. Medieval smoke detectors come with legs and opinions. You stop for a moment at a street corner where a watchman checks his supplies. He opens his oil flask, peers inside, nods. Enough to make the next circuit. There's satisfaction in that small confirmation. Enough is enough. The night doesn't ask for abundance, just continuity. Historians still argue whether night watchmen supplied their own equipment or received it from the state or neighborhood funds. The answer seems to vary by era and district. Some lanterns look standardized, others are clearly personal, repaired again and again rather than replaced. That tells you something about resources and attachment. You take better care of things you know you can't easily replace. A third tool is less visible, but just as important, the voice. Watchmen use it to call the hours, warn of danger, and assert presence. Keeping that voice functional requires care. You imagine lozenges made from honey and herbs, sipped slowly through the night. Losing your voice means losing half your authority. There's an art to projecting sound without shouting, letting it travel without inviting challenge. You feel the weight of all this. Not heavy, but cumulative. Lantern, club, belt, voice, awareness. None of it is dramatic on its own. Together, it forms a system finely tuned to nighttime survival. The watchman ahead of you adjusts his grip. The lantern swings and the flame responds obediently. There's a relationship here, built over countless evenings. As you resume walking, the street narrows and the lantern light presses closer. You think about how these tools shape behavior. People behave differently when illuminated, when observed, when reminded that the night has structure. That's the quiet power of equipment done right. It changes the mood without announcing itself. Joke number 3 arrives softly as you notice the watchman stretch his shoulders. The only thing missing from this medieval loadout is a user manual, preferably one that says "Do not fall asleep." You move on, comforted by the predictability of it all. The tools don't change much. Night to night. They don't need to. They're not here to impress you. They're here to keep the darkness polite. And so far, they're doing an excellent job. You don't need a map to understand where you're going, because the watchman's body already knows. His feet turn before his thoughts do, guided by memory layered over stone. This is the beginning of the lantern routes, though beginning is misleading. They've been looping like this for generations. You follow as he takes a left where the street narrows, pauses at a corner that smells faintly of damp reeds, then continues on a path that feels less chosen than inherited, and that knowledge smooths the night. You notice how often the route bends rather than runs straight. Cairo is not a city of grand avenues at this time. It's a city of curves, alleys, and gentle surprises. Walls shift slightly as buildings settle. Streets follow old property lines, forgotten stream beds, or the logic of this is where people kept walking. The lantern light slides along these curves, revealing doorways just long enough to confirm they're closed, shadows just long enough to decide they're harmless. At certain intersections, the watchman slows. These are memory points. Something once happened here, a theft, a fight, a fire scare, and the route remembers even if the people don't. You feel that pause as a tightening in the air, then release as he moves on. A quirky tidbit drifts in. Some watchmen marked these spots mentally with rhymes or phrases to remember where extra attention was needed. An oral map stitched together with language instead of ink. It's not quite left at the bakery right at the Angry Cat, but it's close. Historians still argue whether routes were officially assigned or evolved informally over time. Walking them, you suspect both. There's structure, yes, but also adaptation. A street becomes quieter after a family moves away, another grows lively after a workshop opens. The lantern route responds, bending slightly, lengthening here, shortening there. This is urban planning at walking speed. You pass along a wall that backs onto a mosque complex. The route hugs it closely, lantern light washing over stone inscribed with verses barely visible in the dimness. Mosques are anchors in the night, places of light, water, and moral gravity. Routes often loop near them, partly for safety, partly because people linger there longer after evening prayers. The Watchman's presence here is gentle, almost ceremonial, reinforcing the idea that this is shared space even after dark. Then the route dips toward water, a canal, a cistern access, a place where moisture seeps up through stone. The temperature drops slightly, and the lantern's reflection trembles. Water is both life and risk. Fires fear it, people need it, and the night treats it with respect. Watchmen keep an eye on these spots, listening for splashes that don't belong, watching for reflections that move when they shouldn't. Joke number 1 slips in quietly. Medieval security cameras come with ripples. The route loops back toward denser housing, and you feel the rhythm now. Walk, pause, listen, adjust. The watchman doesn't rush. Rushing would create gaps. Instead, he keeps time with his own steps, matching pace to expectation. Residents know that if they look out through a lattice window now, they'll see the lantern passing. If they wait too long, it will be gone. That predictability is comforting, like hearing a familiar train in the distance every night. Some routes intersect. You see another lantern approaching, then passing, watchmen exchanging nods or a brief word. These crossings are checkpoints of sorts, confirming that coverage overlaps just enough. No street is entirely alone. Historians still argue whether these intersections were scheduled or happened organically, but you sense intention. Darkness shrinks when lights agree to meet. You also notice where the routes don't go. Dead ends with collapsed walls. Abandoned buildings avoided unless necessary. Not because they're haunted, mostly, but because they offer little payoff for the energy required. The watchman prioritizes living spaces, commerce, movement. The route is pragmatic, not heroic. Joke number 2 drifts by. Even medieval patrols respect work-life balance in spirit if not in practice. As the night deepens, the route subtly shifts. Early evening covers markets and main streets. Later hours emphasize residential alleys and storage areas. The lantern route is not static, it breathes with the city's circadian rhythm. You feel that shift as a softening, fewer sounds, more pauses. The watchman adjusts without thinking, his body attuned to the hour. There's a scholarly debate humming underfoot. Historians still argue whether lantern routes reduced crime through deterrence, or merely displaced it to less patrolled areas. Walking here, you sense another layer. The routes don't just prevent wrongdoing, they define normalcy. They tell the city, this is where night happens, and this is how. That narrative matters as much as enforcement. You turn down a particularly narrow alley, walls close enough that the lantern light touches both sides at once. For a moment it feels intimate, almost private. Then you emerge into a small open square, and the space exhales. This contrast, compression and release is built into the route, keeping the watchman alert without exhausting him. Variety is a tool too. Joke number 3 arrives softly as you realize how much walking this involves. Step counters would have loved medieval Cairo. As you continue, the lantern route begins to feel like a sentence written on the ground, punctuated by pauses and crossings, commas and full stops. You don't need to read it to understand its meaning. It says, someone is here, someone is moving, and the night is not unclaimed. The watchman ahead of you turns another familiar corner, and you follow, now fully inside the logic of the route. It will loop back eventually. It always does. For now, it carries you forward, steady and unhurried, mapping safety one step at a time. You don't leave the route when the markets appear. The route bends to include them because commerce never fully sleeps. Even with shutters pulled tight and stalls folded inward like resting animals, the souks hold on to warmth and memory. You step into this zone of half-quiet, where the day's energy lingers in the air, and the lantern glow feels especially welcome, like a polite knock before entering someone else's dream. A mainstream historical fact settles in easily. Cairo's markets were regulated spaces, and night watchmen played a role in ensuring that after-hours activity didn't slip into theft, fire risk, or unapproved trade. Most merchants closed at dusk, but not all labor stopped. Bakers worked late, porters shifted goods, some transactions preferred discretion. The watchman's job wasn't to eliminate all of this, just to keep it within the city's understood boundaries. You pass rows of wooden shutters, each one bearing scratches and faded symbols, marks of ownership, luck, or past repairs. The lantern light glides over brass locks and iron hinges, checking without touching. A cat startles, knocking something metallic that rings softly before settling again. No alarm follows. The watchman barely glances. He knows the sound of trouble, and this isn't it. Joke number 1 pads by quietly. Medieval motion sensors come with whiskers. There are still people here, though fewer. A baker wipes his hands on his apron, steam drifting from a rear oven. He nods at the watchman, who nods back. This exchange says everything. I see you, I trust you, I'll be back. The lantern moves on, and the baker returns to his work, unbothered. Night in the market isn't lawless, it's negotiated. A quirky tidbit slips between stalls. Some watchmen memorized which merchants stored flammable goods, oils, resins, dried reeds, and paid those shutters extra attention. Fire is the unspoken enemy of the souk. One stray ember could turn a neighborhood into ash before dawn. The lantern pauses longer near spice sellers and oil merchants, the watchman sniffing the air as much as watching it. Your nose follows suit, picking up cumin, coriander, and something sweet you can't quite name. Historians still argue whether markets were more vulnerable at night, or actually safer due to reduced crowds. Walking here, you feel both truths coexisting. Fewer people mean fewer witnesses, but also fewer distractions. The watchman's presence is more noticeable here, the lantern reflecting off polished metal and glazed ceramics, doubling its reach. You hear a whisper of movement behind a stall, and your shoulders tense automatically. The watchman stops, lifts his lantern slightly, and clears his throat, not aggressively, just enough. The movement freezes, then resolves into a familiar shape. A porter rearranging bundles, working late to avoid daytime congestion. A brief exchange confirms legitimacy, and the night relaxes again. Authority, exercised gently, saves everyone effort. The route through the market is slower, more deliberate. Every corner offers potential hiding places. The watchman's steps shorten, his head turning in a practiced arc. He's not suspicious, he's attentive. There's a difference, and you feel it in the atmosphere. Suspicion tightens the air, attention steadies it. You pass a coffee house shuttered for the night, benches stacked, cups inverted to dry. These spaces will come alive again before dawn during Ramadan or festival nights, but for now they sleep. The lantern traces the outline of a signboard, letters barely legible. Joke number 2 drifts in. Even caffeine needs a break in medieval Cairo. There's talk in scholarly circles. Yes, even whispered talk, about whether watchmen unofficially tolerated certain nighttime market activities in exchange for small favors. Historians still argue whether this was corruption or pragmatic governance. Standing here, you sense how thin that line is. A loaf of bread for a watchful eye, a promise to keep noise down. The city runs on these micro-agreements as much as on law. At the heart of the market, you pause near a small open square where carts are sometimes parked overnight. The lantern swings wide, checking wheels and shadows beneath. Rats scatter, offended by the intrusion. The watchman smiles faintly, the closest thing you've seen to humor on his face. Joke number 3 arrives softly. Even the rats know when it's time to go home. The market smells different at night, less sharp, more blended. Scents that competed during the day now coexist peacefully. You breathe more deeply without realizing it. The lantern's flame seems steadier here, sheltered by walls and awnings. This is a pocket of calm inside what was chaos hours ago. As you leave the souk, the route narrows again, and the watchman's pace quickens slightly. Markets demand vigilance, but they also drain it. Moving on restores balance. You glance back once, watching the lantern light retreat from the stalls, leaving them in a softer darkness than before. The market is asleep now, but not abandoned. It's being watched, remembered, included. And as you follow the lantern out into quieter streets, you carry that sense of continuity with you. The idea that even when commerce rests, care does not. You don't notice the sound at first because it blends so naturally into the night. Then it resolves itself into something deliberate, a human voice, stretched and shaped to travel. The watchman lifts his chin slightly, draws breath, and calls out the hour. The sound rolls ahead of you, bouncing off walls, slipping into courtyards, threading through latticed windows. This is not just noise, this is time announced aloud so no one has to guess. A mainstream historical fact settles in with the echo. Night watchmen in medieval Cairo often announced the passing hours, especially between evening and dawn prayers, using shouted calls, chants, or short-rhymed phrases. Mechanical clocks are rare and unreliable. Sundials are asleep. Time at night is communal, shared through voice rather than device. You feel the comfort in that time isn't ticking away secretly. It's being offered openly again and again. The calls vary. Some watchmen prefer plain announcements. First hour of the night, second hour. Others embellish, adding prayers, reminders, or moral nudges. You hear one nearby sing out a line about God watching over sleepers and travelers alike. It's half spiritual reassurance, half gentle nudge to behave yourself. Joke number 1 drifts in. Medieval push notifications, now with blessings. You realize these calls serve multiple purposes. They reassure residents that the watch is active. They warn would-be troublemakers that anonymity is limited. And they help the watchmen themselves stay awake. Speaking resets the body. It pulls you out of the slow slide towards sleep. The voice becomes a tool, just like the lantern or club. A quirky tidbit slips through the soundscape. Some watchmen were known for particularly melodic or dramatic calls, and became minor local celebrities. People would comment on their voices, complain if a favorite was replaced, or imitate them jokingly during the day. In a city without recorded sound, voice carried identity in a powerful way. Historians still argue whether the calls were standardized or left to individual style. Walking here, you suspect the latter within loose guidelines. There's rhythm but not rigidity. Each watchman finds what works, what carries far without straining, what keeps the throat from burning by dawn. You imagine honeyed water, slow sips between calls, careful pacing to protect the voice. Losing it would mean losing authority for the rest of the night. Timekeeping itself is fuzzy by modern standards. Hours are not fixed 60-minute blocks but variable segments adjusted to the length of night, which changes with the seasons. In winter, the calls stretch farther apart. In summer, they come quicker. You feel this elasticity as a kindness. The night isn't forced into an artificial grid. It's allowed to breathe. You notice how people respond. A window shifts. A sleeper turns over. Somewhere a lamp is adjusted. The call ripples through private spaces, gently synchronizing them. Even if no one consciously notes the hour, their bodies absorb it. There's something deeply human about that time delivered by a voice, not a screen. At an intersection, 2 calls overlap briefly, then separate, like harmonies finding their lanes. The watchmen exchange a glance, amused. Joke number 2 slides in quietly. The original surround sound experience, best enjoyed lying down. The calls also function as warnings. If there's danger, fire, flood, disturbance, the tone changes. Shorter phrases, sharper edges. Tonight, though, everything remains calm. The voice stays round and unhurried, wrapping the streets in reassurance. You feel your shoulders drop in response, even though you're not the one who needs guarding. There's scholarly debate humming under this practice. Historians still argue whether hourly calls genuinely reduced crime or mainly reinforced social cohesion. You can feel the answer leaning toward the latter. The calls knit the city together, reminding everyone they share the same night, the same passage of hours. That sense of togetherness might be the strongest deterrent of all. You walk past a small courtyard where someone is still awake, working quietly by lamplight. They pause when the call passes through, listening until it fades, then resume. The sound doesn't interrupt. It frames, like a gentle bell marking time without urgency. As the night deepens, the calls grow softer, less frequent. The watchman spaces them carefully now, conserving energy. Silence becomes more valuable. When the voice does rise again, it feels almost intimate, like a whisper meant for the whole city. Joke number 3 arrives drowsily, as you imagine trying to sleep through this every night. At least no one is arguing about daylight saving time. You continue on, the lantern ahead of you steady, the echoes of the last call still lingering in the air. Time is moving, but slowly, kindly. You don't feel chased by it. You feel accompanied, and in that gentle companionship between voice, light, and listening walls, the night settles deeper around you, content to be measured out loud. You keep pace as the calls fade behind you, and the night grows quieter, not emptier, just more focused. This is where the watchman's role shifts subtly from announcer to mediator. Authority here isn't loud, it's conversational. You notice it in the way he slows near a raised voice, the way his lantern lifts slightly before his words do. Policing in this world is less about force and more about reminding people who they are supposed to be. A mainstream historical fact settles in like a practiced habit. Night watchmen in medieval Cairo often acted as first responders to disputes, tasked with calming arguments, separating parties, and deciding whether something required escalation to daytime authorities. Most conflicts at night were small, neighbors arguing, drunken tempers flaring, misunderstandings stretched thin by fatigue. The watchman's presence alone resolved many of them. Light changes behavior, so does being seen by someone neutral. You approach a narrow lane where 2 men stand too close. Voices low but sharp. The watchman doesn't rush. He approaches at an angle, lantern casting light across both faces at once. "Easy," he says, not as a command but as a suggestion. He listens. He nods. He repeats each side's complaint back to them, slower, calmer. The argument deflates, robbed of urgency. Within moments one man shrugs, the other sighs, and they part ways. No club raised. No names taken. Just the night moving on. Joke number 1 drifts in. Conflict resolution. Now available in warm amber lighting. This gentle authority relies on reputation. A watchman known for fairness can quiet a room with a glance. One known for temper invites challenge. Historians still argue whether watchmen were formally trained in mediation or learned it through experience. Walking here, you feel the latter. This is skill honed by repetition, by seeing how anger peaks and falls, by knowing when silence is more effective than speech. You notice how often the watchman positions himself physically between people. Not aggressively, just enough to redirect energy. His body becomes a boundary. The lantern's light pulls at his feet, anchoring the interaction. You realize that the lantern isn't just illumination, it's a stage marker, signaling that whatever happens here is now public, even if the street is otherwise empty. There's a quirky tidbit that floats up from the city's memory. Some watchmen carried small notebooks or relied on remarkable recall to remember habitual troublemakers, not to punish them but to approach them differently. A known hothead gets a firmer tone early, a chronic complainer gets patience and a longer listen. Custom policing, medieval edition. You pass a doorway where someone leans out too far, voice slurred, laughter spilling into the street. The watchman pauses, raises an eyebrow, and says nothing. The laughter fades, the door closes. Authority by eyebrow. Joke number 2 slides in softly. The most powerful tool in the medieval justice system is disappointment. These interactions are brief but constant. A lost child guided home. A porter told gently to move along. A couple reminded that rooftops are not soundproof. Each moment reinforces a social contract that doesn't need to be written down. The watchman isn't imposing order, he's maintaining it, like a hand smoothing a wrinkled cloth. Historians still argue whether this style of policing was more effective than harsher systems elsewhere. You can feel the answer in your own shoulders, relaxed, not tense. Fear enforces compliance, but familiarity encourages cooperation. The knight prefers the latter. There's also discretion. Not every offence becomes a report. Not every rule is enforced equally at every hour. The watchman weighs context carefully. Is someone hungry? Lost? Exhausted? Mercy here is a practical tool. Tomorrow's neighbour is tonight's nuisance, and everyone knows it. You watch as the lantern moves on, leaving behind a street that feels calmer than before. Nothing dramatic happened. That's the success. Joke number 3 arrives gently as you realise how boring competence can look and how precious it is. As you continue, you sense how much trust the city places in these quiet judgments. The watchman walks on, shoulders loose, lantern steady, ready for the next small human knot to untangle. And you follow, soothed by the idea that most problems, given light and patience, really do want to end peacefully. You notice the smell before the sound this time, a faint sharpness in the air, like heated dust or singed wood, just enough to make the watchman slow his steps. Fire is the quiet obsession of the night. It doesn't shout when it begins, it whispers, and by the time it finds a voice, it's often too late. So you follow as the lantern lifts a little higher, its light probing shadows for the wrong kind of glow. A mainstream historical fact settles in with the seriousness it deserves. Fire prevention and early response were among the most critical duties of night watchmen in medieval Cairo. With tightly packed buildings, wooden beams, and open flames used for cooking and lighting, a single unattended ember could devastate an entire quarter. Watchmen were expected to spot danger early, raise alarms, and summon neighbours long before official help could arrive. You turn a corner where a faint plume curls upward from a rooftop vent. The watchman pauses, inhales, and listens. No crackle, no panic. Just someone burning off scraps safely. He nods to himself and moves on. This is vigilance without drama, the kind that rarely earns thanks because it prevents things people never know almost happened. Joke number 1 drifts in. The best emergency is the one that stays hypothetical. Flood, too, lurks in the background, especially near canals and low-lying streets. You hear water before you see it, a trickle that shouldn't be there. The lantern dips, revealing a small leak where a clay pipe has shifted. The watchman marks the spot mentally, planning to alert someone at dawn. Tonight it's manageable. Tomorrow it could be worse. This is how disasters are shrunk back into inconveniences. Noticed early, remembered, passed along. A quirky tidbit surfaces from the city's long memory. Some watchmen carried whistles, bells, or even small horns to signal emergencies, each sound meaning something different depending on the neighborhood. Fire, flood, theft. Each had its own acoustic fingerprint. You imagine the sudden shock of such a sound in the stillness, the way it would pull people from sleep instantly. The night listens even when it seems quiet. Historians still argue whether these early warning systems were coordinated citywide or evolved locally. Walking here, you feel the patchwork nature of it, each district developing habits that worked for its layout and risks. Uniformity mattered less than speed and recognition. You pass a storage area where jars of oil are stacked carefully, shadows thick between them. The lantern lingers. The watchman checks spacing, sniffing again. Everything is fine, but the pause itself is the point. Fire is a relationship. You don't ignore it, you keep checking in. There's also the quieter emergencies. Someone ill, someone fallen, someone locked out in the wrong part of town. You see a figure sitting on a doorstep, head in hands. The watchman approaches, voice low. A brief exchange reveals exhaustion, not danger. He offers directions, maybe a bit of water, then waits until the person moves on. Crisis diffused by attention. Joke number 2 slides in softly. Sometimes first aid is just being noticed. You realize how much of this work is invisible in the daylight. No reports, no monuments, just countless small decisions that keep the night from tipping into chaos. Historians still argue whether we underestimate these roles because they leave so little physical evidence. Walking here, you feel their weight precisely because they leave so little trace. A sudden sound, a distant shout makes you tense, but the watchman doesn't. He listens, then relaxes. Wrong tone, wrong direction. Not his problem tonight. Knowing when not to respond is as important as knowing when to act. Joke number 3 drifts by as you imagine trying to explain this job description. Must enjoy walking, listening, smelling, and preventing disasters that never happen. You move on. The lantern steady again. The air cooling as the night deepens. Fires stay contained. Water stays where it belongs. People settle back into sleep. And you carry with you the oddly comforting knowledge that most nights are saved not by heroics, but by someone paying quiet, patient attention. You don't have to be invited inside to know what's happening behind the walls. The night gives it away in fragments, soft murmurs through wooden shutters, the creak of a ladder, a cough that echoes just a little too long. As you follow the lantern, your gaze drifts upward and inward, toward the homes and rooftops that make up the sleeping body of the city. This is where the watchman's route becomes almost intimate, threading past private lives without touching them. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. In medieval Cairo, much of domestic life extended vertically, with flat rooftops used for sleeping during hot months, storage, or quiet work. Night watchmen were expected to keep an eye not just on streets but on these elevated spaces, watching for fires, falls, or suspicious movement. The city doesn't end at eye level, it stacks itself. You glance up and catch the silhouette of someone shifting on a roof, adjusting bedding, maybe chasing away a persistent insect. The lantern light doesn't quite reach them, but its presence is felt. The watchman looks too, briefly, then moves on. There's no intrusion here, just acknowledgement. Rooftops are part of the neighborhood, not exceptions to it. You pass a doorway where a family sleeps close together, warmth shared, the faint sound of breathing leaking into the street. Somewhere inside, a baby fusses, then settles. The watchman slows his steps instinctively, as if quieter walking might help. Joke number 1 drifts in softly. Medieval noise-cancelling technology is just mutual consideration. There are homes still awake. A woman finishes weaving by lamplight. A man reads quietly, lips moving without sound. Someone tends a small sickbed, cooling a fevered forehead with damp cloth. These scenes unfold in slices as the lantern passes, revealed and then returned to shadow. You realize the watchman's light is like a courtesy glance, not a stare. It says, "I'm here," not "I'm watching." A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some residents placed small symbols or markings near doors, chalk lines, bits of cloth, to signal that all was well inside, a kind of passive communication with the night patrol. Whether watchmen actually paid attention to these signs is debated, but the idea itself is comforting. Even in sleep, people wanted to speak to the night. Historians still argue whether rooftop sleeping increased or decreased crime risk. From one angle, it exposes people. From another, it puts eyes above the street. Walking here, you feel the latter. The city watches itself, quietly, collectively. A thief would have to navigate not just darkness, but awareness. You notice how the lantern light behaves near homes, softened by fabric, absorbed by wood, reflected dully by plaster. It's less harsh here, more diffuse. The watchman's posture changes too, shoulders easing, pace slowing. This is the heart of his route, the reason it exists. There's a moment where a door opens cautiously, just a crack. A face appears, recognizes the watchman, relaxes. A question is asked about the hour, about a noise earlier. Answers are given. The door closes. Trust reaffirmed. Joke number 2 slips in. The original neighborhood watch comes with actual walking. You also sense boundaries. The watchman doesn't linger, he doesn't peer. He respects the thin line between protection and intrusion. Authority here depends on restraint. Cross it and the lantern becomes unwelcome. As you move on, the rooftops thin, the street widens, and the sounds of sleep deepen. Less movement, more stillness. The city is fully resting now, held together by walls, habits, and the slow loop of light passing below. Joke number 3 arrives drowsily as you imagine trying to sleep through all this awareness. Turns out safety is surprisingly good at inducing sleep. You continue, carrying with you the sense that the night isn't empty at all. It's full of quiet lives stacked above and beside you, all trusting that the lantern will keep moving, that someone will notice if something goes wrong. And so far it does. You don't need to see coins change hands to feel the economics of the night. It hums beneath every step. The watchman's lantern swings, and with it comes the quiet reality that this work, like all work, is tethered to pay, favors, and the small negotiations that keep a city running. You sense it in the way certain doors open more readily, in the way greetings linger a fraction longer near familiar faces. A mainstream historical fact settles in with a soft clink. Night watchmen in medieval Cairo were typically paid modest wages, sometimes supplemented by neighborhood contributions, market funds, or stipends tied to municipal offices. It wasn't lucrative, but it was steady, at least in theory. Payment schedules could be irregular, and delays were common, especially during political transitions or fiscal strain. You imagine waiting weeks for coin, still showing up every night, because the alternative is worse. The watchman pauses near a bakery's back door. A small bundle is handed over without ceremony. Bread still warm, wrapped in cloth. No words are exchanged beyond a nod. This isn't a bribe so much as a thank you, or maybe an insurance policy, or maybe both. Joke number 1 drifts in gently. Medieval benefits package includes carbohydrates. There's a quirky tidbit that surfaces here. Some watchmen were allowed to keep minor fines collected for small infractions, creating an incentive system that could slide easily into abuse. How often that happened is unclear. Records complain loudly when it does, which suggests it wasn't universal. Most nights, the sums are too small to risk reputation over. Still, temptation walks beside the lantern, patient and quiet. Historians still argue whether petty corruption among night watchmen was endemic or exaggerated by moralizing chroniclers. Walking here, you feel how context-dependent it is. In a neighborhood where everyone knows your name, squeezing too hard invites consequences. In busier districts, anonymity creeps in. The system relies heavily on social memory rather than oversight. You notice how the watchman keeps his posture neutral when passing wealthier homes, respectful, distant. Near poorer dwellings, his tone softens, his pauses lengthen. Pay may be equal, but relationships aren't. He knows who can offer bread, who can offer information, and who has nothing to spare but goodwill. There are perks beyond food. A place to sit for a moment, a shared joke, a heads up about a loose dog or a broken step. These micro-advantages make the night survivable. Joke number 2 slides in quietly. The original loyalty program runs on eye contact and mutual survival. You pass a corner where another watchman is speaking too warmly to a shop owner. Laughter a bit too loud. The lantern lingers. Our watchman notes it. Says nothing. Tomorrow, that will be gossip. Next week, it might be a warning. Accountability here is slow and sideways, but it exists. Scholars debate whether low pay undermined effectiveness, or whether community ties compensated for it. Historians still argue whether increasing wages would have reduced corruption, or merely changed its shape. You suspect the latter. Money matters, but so does belonging. As the night deepens, favors thin out. People sleep, bread is gone. The watchman relies on routine again. He adjusts his belt, resettles the lantern, and keeps moving. This is the job when no one is watching or thanking. Joke number 3 arrives softly, as you imagine explaining this compensation model to a modern accountant. You continue onward, aware now that the lantern's glow is powered not just by oil, but by a web of small exchanges and expectations. The city doesn't pay its guardians well, but it feeds them just enough to keep the light moving. And for tonight, that's enough. You feel the rhythm of the night change again. Not sharply, just enough to notice if you're paying attention. This is the part of the route where the city's quieter economies come into view, where not everyone sleeps, and not everyone who's awake fits neatly into daytime expectations. The lantern moves through these spaces carefully, aware that night rearranges social rules without quite discarding them. A mainstream historical fact settles in gently. Women in medieval Cairo participated actively in household management and certain forms of work that often extended into the night, including textile production, food preparation, and caregiving. While public nighttime movement was more restricted for women than men, it was not absent, especially for those whose labor or family duties required it. The watchman's job included navigating these realities with discretion. You pass a doorway where a woman steps out briefly, adjusting a water jar before retreating inside. The watchman averts his eyes slightly. A practiced courtesy. Respect here is procedural, built into posture and timing. The lantern doesn't linger. Privacy is maintained by mutual choreography. There are other figures too, midwives moving quickly, shawls pulled tight, widows running small home-based trades, servants sent on late errands to avoid daytime crowds. These movements are purposeful, not furtive. The watchman recognizes the difference instantly. His presence offers protection as much as oversight. Joke number 1 drifts in softly. The night shift includes customer service. Families shape the night economy as well. You hear the low murmur of a shared meal happening late, dishes clinking softly. Ramadan nights will amplify this later, but even now families adapt their schedules to heat, work, and habit. Children sleep in piles. Elders wake early. The night stretches to accommodate them all. A quirky tidbit surfaces from the city's edges. Some women were known to coordinate informal neighborhood alerts, quiet knocks, whispered messages, if something felt wrong at night, creating a parallel safety network that complemented the watchman's routes. Historians still argue how widespread this was, but the idea fits the texture of the city: layered vigilance, shared responsibility. You notice how the watchman slows near homes known to house women alone. Not suspiciously, protectively. He passes a bit closer, lantern angled to illuminate the doorway. It's a small gesture, but it matters. Safety here is often about being seen at the right moment. There's also work that exists almost entirely at night. Laundering near water sources, dough preparation for early baking, quiet craft work done when the house finally settles. The lantern catches glimpses of these tasks through cracks and courtyards. They feel steady, ordinary. The night is not an interruption, it's an opportunity. Historians still argue whether nighttime activity offered women greater autonomy or simply shifted labor into less visible hours. Walking here, you feel both truths brushing past each other. The night can hide you, but it can also free you from eyes that judge too loudly in daylight. Joke number 2 slides in gently as you imagine trying to explain these schedules to someone obsessed with work-life balance. The watchman exchanges brief words with a midwife, confirming direction, offering escort if needed. She declines with a nod. She knows these streets as well as he does. Respect flows both ways. Authority adjusts to competence. As you move on, the lantern's light softens again, and the night resumes its quieter pattern. The economy of darkness continues, unwritten, adaptable, human, and you follow, feeling how the city makes room for lives that don't stop, just because the sun does. Joke number 3 arrives, sleepily, as you realize how much of history happens after bedtime. You feel it before you see it. The night stretching, loosening its belt, deciding it's not going to bed anytime soon. This is what happens when the calendar shifts and the rules soften. Ramadan nights and festival evenings change the patrol entirely. The lantern still leads, but now it swims through laughter, prayer, music, and the gentle chaos of a city awake on purpose. A mainstream historical fact settles in with the glow of many lights. During Ramadan and major festivals, medieval Cairo famously came alive after sunset, with extended prayers, public feasting, night markets, and social gatherings that lasted until dawn. Night watchmen didn't disappear during these times. They adapted. Routes lengthened. Patrols intensified. The job became less about guarding sleepers and more about guiding celebration without letting it tip too far. You walk into a street that would normally be silent at this hour, only to find it humming. Lanterns hang from doorways. Oil lamps cluster around food sellers. The air smells richer. Fried dough, sweet syrups, spiced meat. The watchman adjusts immediately, lifting his lantern higher so it doesn't vanish among the many lights. Visibility matters more now, not less. Joke number 1 drifts in warmly. When everyone's awake, you have to work harder to look official. Calls to prayer ripple through the city. Longer and more melodic tonight. People move in groups, greeting one another, lingering in doorways. Children dart past, sugared and unstoppable. The watchman's pace slows, not from fatigue but from density. Crowds require patience. He doesn't weave through them, he lets them part around the lantern, a familiar signal that keeps the flow polite. A quirky tidbit surfaces like a sweet aftertaste. Some chroniclers mention that watchmen occasionally help decorate streets for major festivals, hanging lamps or helping organize traffic patterns in advance. Whether this was official duty or neighborly obligation is unclear, but it blurs the line between enforcer and participant. Tonight, the watchman feels less like a guard and more like a host. Historians still argue whether crime increased or decreased during Ramadan nights. More people awake means more eyes, but also more opportunity. Walking here, you feel the balance tilt toward order. Celebration carries its own discipline. Fasting during the day sharpens tempers, but breaking fast together softens them again. You pass a group seated on rugs, sharing food, laughter rising and falling like waves. The lantern pauses at the edge of the circle, not intruding, just acknowledging. A plate is offered. The watchman declines with a smile on duty, but the gesture lingers. Community recognizes its caretakers, especially tonight. Music drifts from somewhere deeper in the quarter. Drums, a reed flute, voices keeping in perfect time. The watchman listens, gauges volume, decides it's acceptable. This is not a night for strict silence. Rules bend to ritual. Joke number 2 slides in softly. Noise complaints are on holiday. Routes change during these nights. Residential alleys give way to public squares. Markets reopen briefly. Coffee houses glow like constellations. The watchman knows which paths to emphasize, which to skim. His memory updates annually, folding festival logic into the usual map. There's more mediation tonight, but it's lighter. Over-enthusiastic debates, playful shoving, someone who's had one cup of coffee too many. The lantern intervenes gently, a reminder rather than a reprimand. Authority here is festive but firm, like a chaperone who also wants you to have a good time. Historians still argue whether these lively nights strengthened civic bonds or merely exhausted everyone involved. You feel the former. Shared wakefulness creates stories, and stories stitch people together. The watchman becomes part of those stories, even if he never tells them himself. As the night deepens toward dawn, energy ebbs and flows. Some people drift home, others arrive, fresh for pre-dawn prayers. The watchman adjusts again, voice softer now, lantern steadier. This is endurance work, not excitement. Joke number 3 arrives drowsily, as you imagine trying to enforce bedtime during a city-wide celebration. You continue on, carried by the sense that tonight is different, special, allowed to stretch. The lantern still moves, still watches, but it does so with a smile. You can almost see. And as the festival night rolls on around you, you feel the rare comfort of a city wide awake together, safely held by light and habit. The crowds thin again, not all at once, but in patches, like fog lifting unevenly. Laughter fades into footsteps, footsteps into echoes, and eventually you're back in the quieter version of the night, where rule-breaking feels more tempting, simply because fewer people are watching. This is where cleverness tests routine, and the watchman's job sharpens just a little. A mainstream historical fact settles in with a measured step. Medieval Cairo enforced nighttime curfews at various points, especially during periods of unrest, and night watchmen were responsible for monitoring compliance, questioning late wanderers, and reporting serious offences. Curfews weren't always strict or universal, but they existed as tools tightened or loosened depending on politics, plague, or paranoia. You notice how the watchman's posture changes here. His shoulders square slightly. The lantern lifts higher. Silence becomes more informative than sound. Every movement stands out. A shadow that lingers too long. A footstep that stops when it shouldn't. You feel the difference between a city resting and a city being tested. A figure slips along a wall ahead of you, moving with practiced ease. The watchman slows, letting the distance close naturally. When he speaks, it's calm, almost bored. Late night, not a question. The figure pauses, turns, offers an explanation that's plausible enough. Errand, family matter, lost track of time. The watchman listens, weighs tone more than words, then nods and gestures toward a well-lit route home. No pursuit, no confrontation. Deterrence by interruption. Joke number 1 drifts in softly. The art of ruining a crime without making a scene. There are thieves, of course. Cairo is a city, not a fable. Some specialize in roofs, others in storage areas, others in distraction. The watchman knows their types, if not their names. He watches for patterns, too much stillness, too much confidence. Lantern routes are designed to disrupt those patterns, appearing just often enough to make planning unreliable. A quirky tidbit surfaces here. Some thieves reportedly timed their movements between lantern passes, counting steps and seconds in the dark. It worked. Sometimes. Other times, a watchman lingered unexpectedly, and plans unraveled. The night is a game of imperfect information, and no one ever has the full board. Historians still argue whether crime rates were actually lower at night or simply underreported. Walking here, you sense how much goes unseen, and how much is prevented without record. Success leaves no evidence. Failure becomes story. You pass a gate where a watchman checks its lock, rattling it lightly. Gates matter during curfew periods, controlling movement between quarters. They creak softly, sounding older than the street itself. The lantern light traces rust and wear, proof of years of closing and opening, fear and relief. There's humor even here. A would-be sneak freezes dramatically when the lantern appears, then relaxes too quickly, pretending to be nothing more than a man adjusting his sandal. The watchman raises an eyebrow. The man scurries off, dignity left behind. Joke number 2 slides in gently. Stealth level failed. Please try again tomorrow. Rules bend at the edges. Someone with the right reputation gets waved through. Someone without it gets turned back. Authority is not blind. It's contextual. Historians still argue whether this flexibility undermined justice or made it humane. You feel the night prefers the latter. As the hour deepens, the watchman's vigilance sharpens, but his movements slow. Fatigue and focus balance each other carefully. He relies more on listening now, less on calling out. The lantern's circle feels tighter, more precious. Joke number 3 arrives quietly as you imagine trying to outsmart someone whose entire job is noticing small mistakes in the dark. You continue onward, aware that the night is thinner now, stretched close to dawn. The tests are fewer but more pointed, and the watchman meets them not with force but with presence. Light placed exactly where someone hoped it wouldn't be. The night doesn't end so much as it loosens its grip. You feel the shift before you see it. Air cooling, shadows softening, the sky just barely thinking about changing color. This is the hour when routines begin to slip. Not from disorder, but from anticipation. Dawn is coming, and the watchman knows it. A mainstream historical fact settles in quietly. By the late Mamluk period, Cairo's systems of night security were undergoing reforms, with responsibilities shifting between local watchmen, military patrols, and appointed officials as rulers attempted to centralize control. Old habits didn't vanish overnight, but they were questioned, adjusted, sometimes replaced. You walk streets that feel familiar now. Lantern routes repeat themselves night after night, but lately the watchman notices subtle changes. New checkpoints, different expectations. A soldier posted where a neighbor once stood. Authority feels heavier, less personal. The lantern still glows, but it no longer speaks for itself in every corner. A quirky tidbit floats up like dust in early light. Some watchmen reportedly resisted reforms by quietly maintaining old routes and practices, trusting habit over decree. Others welcomed change, hoping for steadier pay or clearer rules. You sense the tension in the way the watchman pauses, deciding whether to follow instruction or instinct. Historians still argue whether these reforms improved public safety or merely reshuffled power. Walking here, you feel both. Certain streets are calmer, others feel watched in a different way, less communal, more imposed. The watchman adjusts his pace, checking familiar doors, nodding to faces that may soon not be his responsibility. There's nostalgia in the lantern's swing. He remembers nights of mediation, of knowing who belonged where. Now, names blur into categories. Joke number 1 arrives softly. Change management, medieval edition, no training manual included. You pass a former gate now left open permanently, its purpose absorbed into broader patrols. The hinges are stiff, unused. The lantern lingers there a moment longer than necessary. This gate once mattered. Now it's a relic waiting to be forgotten. Pay structures change too. Some watchmen receive wages from the state instead of the neighborhood. Others lose small privileges, the occasional meal, the informal authority. Corruption shifts form rather than disappearing. Historians still argue whether formalization reduced abuse or simply hid it better. You notice fewer conversations tonight, more silence. Orders don't invite discussion. The watchman follows them, but not without thought. His lantern still traces the old paths in memory, even when his feet don't. Joke number 2 slips in gently as you imagine trying to submit a lantern route expense report. The sky lightens almost imperceptibly. Birds test their voices. The watchman knows this might be one of his last patrols, or one of many under new rules. Uncertainty settles heavier than fatigue. Yet the city endures. Streets breathe. People adapt. The lantern keeps moving, even if its meaning changes. Authority reshapes itself, but the need for light in the dark remains constant. Joke number 3 arrives quietly, more a sigh than a laugh. History loves a reorganization. You continue toward morning, aware that something is ending, and something else is beginning. The night has taught you its patterns, and now it prepares to hand them over, altered but intact, to whatever comes next. You take the last stretch slowly, because there's no reason to rush what's almost finished. The lantern's flame feels steadier now, less threatened by darkness, as if it knows its work is nearly done. The city exhales. Night releases its final hold without drama. A mainstream historical fact settles in with the pelling sky. Medieval Cairo's night watch typically concluded at dawn, when daytime officials, shopkeepers, and workers reclaimed the streets. The watchman's authority didn't vanish instantly, but it softened, transferring responsibility back to daylight rhythms and familiar faces. You walk past doors beginning to stir. A bolt slides back. A shutter creaks. Somewhere bread is already baking. The watchman nods to early risers, people who exist in the overlap between night and day. He is one of them now, neither fully nocturnal nor quite done. A quirky tidbit drifts up gently. Some watchmen reportedly slept during daylight hours in communal lodging near mosques or markets, their schedules permanently misaligned with the rest of society. It gave them a reputation for being slightly out of step, always tired, always awake at the wrong moments. You feel that dislocation now, the strange calm that comes after holding vigilance all night. Historians still argue whether night watchmen were viewed as respected civic figures or merely tolerated necessities. Walking here at dawn, you sense a quiet appreciation. No cheers, no thanks, just the absence of disaster, which is its own kind of praise. The lantern dims, oil runs low, the watchman lowers it for the first time in hours, letting daylight take over. The streets look different without shadows to manage. Details flatten, mystery evaporates. The night's private conversations dissolve into ordinary noise. You pause at a familiar corner, remembering the disputes settled, the gates checked, the festival laughter, the would-be thief pretending to adjust his sandal. All of it already feels distant, like a dream that resists retelling. Joke number 1 arrives faintly. The world's longest shift, no coffee break included. The watchman's role recedes now. He blends into the crowd. Lantern extinguished, authority folded away like a cloak. Someone else will take over, or something else entirely. Systems change. Nights keep happening. Historians still argue whether these routines shaped Cairo more than its monuments. You feel they did. Stone stands still. Habit moves. Joke number 2 slips in softly as you imagine trying to explain your job to someone who only sees the city by day. The final steps are quiet. No announcement. No ceremony. Just the sense that the watch is over. Successfully, which is the only way it's supposed to end. And now, as the last images soften, the pace slows even further. Sentences stretch. Thoughts loosen their grip. You're no longer walking. You're drifting. The lantern light fades into a gentle blur, replaced by the pale reassurance of morning that doesn't ask anything from you. The city is awake now, and you don't need to be. You've done enough simply by being here, by watching, by following the rhythm of footsteps and flame. Breath evens out, sounds grow distant. Cairo recedes into memory, into story, into something safe and finished for the night. The last warmth of the lantern lingers behind your eyes, not as light anymore, but as a feeling steady, calm, unhurried. The streets you walked grow quieter in your mind, details softening at the edges, names and places dissolving into a single peaceful impression of movement and care. Your shoulders ease, your jaw unclenches. There's no patrol left to complete, no corner left unchecked. The city is fine without you now, just as it always is when night hands its work back to day. Thoughts slow the way footsteps did near dawn, stretching out, pausing longer between one and the next. If an image returns, lantern glow on stone, a distant call, the hush before morning, it does so gently without urgency. You don't need to hold on to any of it. History can keep its stories. You've already walked them. Breathing deepens. The rhythm is easy, natural, familiar. With each exhale, the remaining noise fades, like oil finally burning down to nothing. There's comfort in routine, even imagined routine. Comfort in knowing the night was watched, that order existed quietly, without drama, without demand. And now, nothing is asked of you at all. Just rest, just drift,